And I'm going to show a tweet here from Van Eck. No, Bitcoin News talking about Van Eck, who did a bit of a breakdown of what kind of impact a strategic Bitcoin reserve bill would have when all these states start buying Bitcoin. There's been 17, I think. I think one of them failed so far, but the rest are just in the process of going through their, I don't even know what you'd call it, the process of, changing laws and introducing things in government. I ignore government as much as I can, so I don't know all the terminologies. But anyways, they're talking about the impact of states buying Bitcoin. And on this channel, I've done a couple different breakdowns of who owns the Bitcoin today, what it could look like in 25 years from now, after countries, states, corporations, all these entities start buying Bitcoin. And I'm going to tell you, I was way off with my calculation. So I'm going to show you what I'm talking about here with this tweet, and then we're going to look at my spreadsheet and see how things, how wrong I was, essentially. So let's bring this up first. We'll start with the tweet, and then we'll talk about the impact of this. So this says, new Van Eck's Matthew Siegel breaks down the impact of state-level bills, strategic Bitcoin reserve bills. If passed, they could drive 23 billion into Bitcoin purchases. That equates to just under 250,000 Bitcoin, or more than 1% of the total supply. So this is based on the state. This is based on their funding source and the potential investment of 10%, which I do believe will be about the starting point for a lot of these states if they're going to take this seriously. 1 or 2% isn't going to do anything for these states. So I do think that it's going to be at least 10% allocation. And then you get the potential investment and estimated Bitcoin here for a total of 242,000 Bitcoin. So now if we look at the spreadsheet that I had and kind of how I've been basing my whole thesis on here, I was way out to lunch. And let's see why that was. So basically what I did is I looked at what we have today. So you can see who owns the Bitcoin today. This is before any strategic Bitcoin reserves. We got public companies own just under 3%, ETFs, BlackRock's, they own about 6%, DeFi, pretty much irrelevant, under 1%. Private companies, 2%, and governments so far have about 2.5% for a total of 14%. Individuals currently hold 70 or 69% of Bitcoin. That is a very big deal, a very big deal for a lot of reasons. But then we got the lost coins, about 7%. These are estimated, and this number will go up. Left to be mined for the next 140 years. No, 100 years, sorry. There's 5% of the total supply, and then that's it. 5% left, and it's going to be probably flowing to these big corporations because they own the majority of the mining companies. So we can just assume that this 6% is going to flow right into the bad guys here, bringing their total to 20%. But this is where it gets interesting, because this is what my prediction was for the post-strategic Bitcoin reserve, where I said that probably in the next 25 years after these states, countries, and other companies adopt Bitcoin, this is what it might look like. So the public companies, I added about 500K to. ETFs, I added about 700K to, just based on their current balance and the rate that they've been buying Bitcoin so far. So that's 500, 700, 200 for private companies. I didn't give anything to DeFi because they're kind of irrelevant here overall. And then 2 million for governments. This is what we need to be paying attention to here. 2 million for governments. So if we scroll over a bit here, this is kind of what I based it on. I don't know what happened to these, why they're over in left field here. But I said that the US would get about 1 million coins. That's what the strategic reserve bill said, that they were going to acquire 200,000 Bitcoin for 5 years for a total of 1 million Bitcoin. China, I said they want to obviously compete with the US as a superpower in the world. They'll probably get about 0.3 million or 300,000 Bitcoin. Same with Russia and same with UAE. I really believe that China, Russia, and UAE already has this amount. They just haven't announced it yet. But what we just saw there was states. The states pretty much right off the bat will have about 250,000 Bitcoin. Oh, it's 2.5 million, 0.25 million Bitcoin, which I did not foresee in this calculation. That's a pretty big chunk. That's just under what I assumed that China and Russia would eventually get to. So if the states adopt this right away, and that's kind of like their first step into Bitcoin is like a 10% allocation, these numbers are going to be way higher than this. But we have to keep in mind here, to round this kind of theory out, that these coins have to come from individuals. There's no other source now that these can come from. So if the US government, if Texas wants Bitcoin, if the UAE wants Bitcoin, if Apple, Tesla, Nvidia, Meta want Bitcoin, it's all going to have to come from the individuals, because they're not going to come from the lost coins. And we've already factored in the to be mined coins going to these big entities. So they're going to have to come from the individual. So this is what it could look like. This is pretty much, I think, best case for individuals, is that in 25 years from now, our ownership shrinks from 70% to 55%. Best case. And so I just want everybody to really understand how scarce this Bitcoin is, because we're just talking about like 4 countries here and 15 states. And that's going to completely change the dynamic of ownership within Bitcoin. So, moral of the story here, and what excites me most about this whole Bitcoin thing and scarcity and what's driving it, is that if you understand that the longer you hold on to your Bitcoin, the less of it you're going to have to spend. The reason that works is because these big entities, the governments, the public corps, the hedge funds, the BlackRocks, they can only get Bitcoin from us. That's their only source now, other than the mining, but there's only 5% of coins left to be mined over the next 100 years. So that Bitcoin can only come from us. And the longer you hold out, the more they're going to have to pay, because they cannot print or create Bitcoin. It's the only asset that has ever existed like that before. So if they can't print it or create it, they have to get it from us. So they're going to run the price up to try to tempt people to sell their Bitcoin. They're going to get rid of the capital gains tax to try to tempt people to sell their Bitcoin. But the longer you hold on to it, the more frustrated they're going to get, and the more they're going to have to pay for it. And the more they pay for it, the less you're going to have to sell to meet whatever needs you have in your life. So it is an absolutely perfect scenario for the individual right now, if you understand it, if you have the conviction, and you're willing to hold on to it, regardless of what they're offering you. Because when you get to the point where you understand that there's real assets like Bitcoin and there's fake assets like the dollar, once you get to that point, again, if you ask any Bitcoiner right now, the average Bitcoiner, what their price of Bitcoin is, it is much, much, much higher than $100,000. That's the people who are just getting into Bitcoin. That's the price that they're willing to pay for it. But the people who are going to be selling these coins to these big entities are going to want way more than that. I would honestly need about $100 or $100 million per Bitcoin for me to sell my whole stack. I might sell 2% if the price is right, maybe $1 million, maybe $5 million. I might sell another 2% if it gets to 50 million. But after that, my needs are met. And any Bitcoiner has been living, if you're anything like me, you've been living pretty frugally. Is that even a word? Pretty scarce. You haven't been wasting a whole lot of money. You just basically buy what you need and nothing in excess. And so when you're trying to tempt these kind of people into selling this real asset for fake assets, it's just not going to happen. So I really believe that over this next decade, there's going to come a time where people just stop accepting fiat dollars for Bitcoin. So in the future, if you want Bitcoin, you're either going to have to trade your time and energy. You're going to have to be hired by a Bitcoiner or a Bitcoin company, or just provide value to people and they'll give you Bitcoin in return for it. Or you're going to have to trade real assets for it. Land, gold, a house, a truck, something that's real, not dollars. So it's going to happen. It's going to happen very quicker than people think. And we haven't even scratched the surface on seeing how scarce this asset is. Once these big companies like Coinbase, MicroStrategy, these countries, these states start showing their proof of reserves and actually showing how much Bitcoin they have, and you can make a simple spreadsheet and see just how much Bitcoin is left for the other 99% of the world, we're going to see true absolute scarcity that we've never even thought of before. And it's coming soon.